So basically, our mission today is enabling companies to build great products by modernizing their IT architectures. So that is what actually drives us, because there's software in almost every product today. We, as a company, want to help our customers to build those products, and what we think is that an architecture is very fundamental to build those products today and even more in the future. So this is the team. So you will meet some of the people actually here on site. So that's the entire group. As you might know, the company was founded in 2012, so a couple of years already back. Today we're 55 employees. The major part of the team located in Bonn, the former capital of Germany before it moved to Berlin. And then we have people in our Boston office. Mark, who's running the Boston office, is also here. We're really proud to have today more than 120 customers using the product worldwide, and I will share a little bit on that in a second when we go through it. So what are we actually doing? So you see here a first view of the product actually, and it relates a little bit to what David said before. One of the key tasks we're doing is to connecting things, to ensuring that we don't look only on tables of data in the architecture. So one of the big things we're trying to do is to relating, in this case, applications, how they exchange data, what technologies are used to exchange that data, what data objects, so you see it here, account and cost, are stored in certain applications. Yeah, so to bring that alive, so that's one of the main pieces why we've built the product LeanIX. We make it accessible using our mobile app, also for mobile use cases, and we are extremely proud to have customers now all around the world, and I've listed a few of them here who use the product with many hundreds or thousands of users. Today, LeanIX is actually used in more than 15 industries. So for us as a company, that's very interesting and important to understand, because the demand for such a tool is not limited to a specific industry, and it's also not limited to a large corporation or a younger company or like a scale-up startup. So we have very large corporations, and they have their task to understand how they can improve their landscape, so clean it up, reduce complexity. But we have customers who are very fast growing and want to ensure that they keep growing at that pace and don't get drowned in complexity. So it's not limited to any industry, and it's not limited to a certain size. Yeah? Even we at LeanIX, we run LeanIX on our own, especially for our GDPR use case, and we're happy to give some insights on that. So if you compare us with a lot of your companies, we're tiny. Yeah? So probably if you draw the picture David has shown, yeah, so in terms of the revenue, we're a small spot on that. Yeah, but still we're making a lot of use of LeanIX on our own. A little bit on growth. I said it before. We're a startup. We're 6 years old. We're growing pretty fast over all the years. Today, as of today, we're counting 120 customers worldwide, and we're also expanding very quickly into the US market. You will have the chance to talk to some of the customers here. There are a couple of ones in the pipeline. So that's pretty exciting for us. That our product is not really limited to what we do in Europe, but that we can come to this market and create a very compelling solution here. So what are typically the questions people trying to solve with LeanIX? Yeah? And so we split it a bit in different areas. So LeanIX today is not limited to one special group, but it answers questions for different stakeholders. So what we can usually ask is from a CIO level, it's the questions of how many applications are we actually running, which applications are running in the cloud, so how fast are we moving them as part of a transformation program. which application will be end of life this year. So, so how do I mitigate or how do I drive down the complexity in the portfolio? But then if you go to more the business view of IT, so you would like to understand which application supports a specific business capability or process. So later today, we will have a talk of Mike Rosen, who will give some insights on business capability models. And so this is one of the key points to understand the application portfolio in the business context and really get those relations. So if we further go down to the other group here, it's IT delivery. So it's really understanding responsibilities. Who is responsible for an application, or what's the recommended technology stack? So what we're trying to do actually today is connecting the business questions, the business context, all the way to the technology. So that's what's really driving us with the product. How are we doing this? So some of you might be familiar with our product, some not. So that's why I'm showing some areas in the product here. So we do that using dashboards. So if you go into the product, you will be able to see a dashboard which summarizes certain views. Yeah, so you could see which applications are critical, how many applications fulfill a different service level agreement. Yeah, and then you can drill down into the data from there. You can click on the dashboards and get the list behind that. You would end up, for example, in the inventory, where you get an overview of your applications or your IT components, the software, the hardware. All that is listed here. You can use very flexible ways to filter it, to look through that. And then you would be able to go into the reporting to analyze things and make sure you get your questions answered. So, for example, this is a heat map where we're showing how the business criticality of the application maps to the capabilities on top here, and on the side to the organization. So it helps business leaders and IT leaders to understand in which areas do they run critical applications. So this is like what we do with the product. I can just encourage you also to make sure today to use one of the live demo stations to see much more about the product. And also Christian in his talk later on, he will give some insights into the product. There's one thing we really have always focused on. How can we make our customers successful in using an enterprise architecture solution? And there's a research by Gartner saying that only 50% of clients have successful first-time enterprise architecture tool implementations. And that's, I would say, something as a vendor or any vendor in this space needs to come up with good ideas on that, and needs to think hard what is the reason for that. So luckily, Gartner also gives some insights on what could be potential issues and areas. So it could be mismatch with end user needs. Yeah? So the whole topic about user experience, how do we access those tools? The second big part is incomplete or inaccurate information. And the third part is unclear value proposition for the investment. So it's more from a business case perspective. What I thought for today's talk is would be interesting to drill deeper into this topic of incomplete information and inaccurate information, and to list it to get a better understanding what are the underlying reasons. So what some of the topics are, and I listed here the 4 key ones, is data duplication. Yeah, so data resides in different storages, and you have especially then the problem of data source conflict. So it's not always clear which data source is the authoritative one. Yeah, so where do we keep the master list of our applications? Where do we keep the master list of projects? Yeah, and the questions go on. Then you have the topic of data collection issues. Yeah, so it's always hard to get the data in. Yeah, so you always need to convince a lot of people, and then if you don't maintain it regularly, it gets outdated. Yeah? So these are like the 4 key issues you would have with the underlying issues with that topic. And from there, as a vendor, we thought about what are really the root causes and how can we address that. So For us, the first root cause is actually that data today is largely residing in silos, not only in tool silos, but it's also organizatorical silos. It's where you have a process boundary. So the IT service management people have their solution, their process. Then you have the enterprise architects. Then you have the application architects. Developers store their code differently. So you have those silos, and they are often not well connected. So one of the important things we as a tool vendor, what can we bring to the table to help working on that issue, is actually that LeanIX is very open for an ecosystem. And we do that in actually 3 areas. So the first area is our mission is to be API first. So we come up with a well-documented API. So you see here all our APIs in our services are documented using Swagger. For those of you not knowing it, it's a way to list all the functionality which an API provides. It's an interactive documentation. You can try out endpoints of an API, and you can also generate software development kits out of that. So it's making your life easy. If you want to build integrations, you're not limited to any certain programming language, but you can use that documentation to also create and auto-generate your SDK. We are following a very modern way of interacting with our data. It's based on GraphQL. GraphQL is a specification invented by Facebook. They invented it because they wanted to have a graph-based access to the data. So you might all know Facebook is very much graph-driven. Data is interconnected. But they also had the issue that data would always be transmitted to the mobile phones in large chunks. And so with GraphQL, they invented a way which is a little bit like the SQL for APIs. You can specify which data you want from the graph, and you can avoid that large data is transmitted when you only want a certain amount of data. So our inventory content today is accessible by GraphQL. We have made good experience that customers have used it to build their custom reports because it feels quite natural to use the specification. So, but this is just the first thing which we think is fundamental, being open, having this API and driving this forward. The second big piece is actually providing out-of-the-box integrations. So we don't want to leave you alone building integrations on your own. So what we do is we provide an integration with ServiceNow towards the IT service management area. We have an integration with a business process management solution. It's called Signavio. It's a very modern and young company from Germany. They have more than 1,000 customers worldwide, and they are challenging the business process management market in a similar way like we do the enterprise architecture market. And then we have an integration with Technopedia. So I've put here the Flexera logo. Technopedia is a big catalog of software and hardware technology components. So they help to identify the technology risk, because Technopedia gives you that catalog, and you can then understand where you have software and hardware out of the life cycle. So these are integrations we have today out of the box. We're working on further integrations. Some things which are on the roadmap are adapters for Microsoft Azure and AWS, because we feel that a lot of the benefit can also be in getting data from cloud platforms where you deploy the applications. But I will come to that also later on. But what excites me most is that we're not limited to out-of-the-box integrations, but we have customers taking our APIs, taking our documentation, and coming up with all sorts of custom integrations. So for example, with Slack or SAP, as an example, where customers are taking out data from the process intelligence, or they're taking out organizatorical data, like which user groups or which org units a company has, and just taking that automatically from SAP, putting that into LeanIX. We have customers connecting it to Jira, very widely used by Atlassian product. We have customers connecting it to App Dynamics, an application performance management solution where you can understand the performance metrics of a certain application. And then we have customers using Power BI to build custom dashboards and using the data from the inventory to visualize it in their custom way. So there are different ways and options how to communicate with LeanIX. We as a vendor continue driving this forward with out-of-the-box integrations, but we are also very happy to see partners and customers driving forward custom integrations as well. I'm picking one of those out-of-the-box integrations today as an example to give some more insights on what it's really doing. I've selected ServiceNow as an example because what we see is that IT modernization today is not only a topic on a strategic level, like for LeanIX, but it's also a topic on a more operational level. So how we see the world, how those solutions connect to each other. So usually you are talking about the strategic roadmap of the applications, so where are you going to head, but also you look at the operational efficiency. And so we think the combination of those tools really help because LeanIX is very well suited to strategically transform the IT landscape, especially having a focus on the business context, on planning ahead, which applications should be there in the future. While on the other hand, ServiceNow is excellent in running smooth IT operations. It's made for more the transactional view where you have tickets, you have problems, you have incidents, you manage all of that, and you need an exact view of the infrastructure for that in order to manage that. Yeah? So we think those tools work very well together. How's the integration we've built actually set up? So we have set up a bi-directional integration with ServiceNow. The use case we're reflecting here is that we take from the ServiceNow CMDB, we allow customers to take in software and hardware. It can be either discovered if customers are using the software asset management module. So then the discovery would run and upload the software and hardware components into the LeanIX repository. There it can be used to understand where there are technology risks. So where is software running out of life cycle? How does it affect the applications? And then in LeanIX, it can be used to define which of the technology components should be the standard. So you could see within ServiceNow, if you're using a software and hardware component, am I following the standard which was set by the technology governance? So this is one of the use cases we're supporting, and I'm showing later how flexible it's actually to configure it. We've gone through a certification process with ServiceNow. They've looked closely at how we've built it, at security, if it's going to be upgradable. So that's a very important piece for us because ServiceNow often has this piece of it needs to stay upgradable with companies, and we don't want to block this. Yeah? So if you're building like a custom integration, you might have the fear that in the future you're blocking new releases, and this is what we're avoiding because now we're certified. It can be downloaded from the ServiceNow App Store, and it's currently supporting the latest Kingston release and further 3 releases back. So the Jakarta release, Helsinki. Releases before, and so that's a big topic. Also, if you work together with your IT service management colleagues, that it's coming from a standard. So, giving some more insights on what it's actually doing, how it's reflecting. So, I want you to look first on the architecture stack here. So usually. What we do is we look from more a business perspective down to the IT, really the operational IT perspective. And what we have done is we have sliced this down into key data objects on the different levels. So on the business process architecture, so one of the key objects would be the process which is managed. And so as I've mentioned before, we work together with a vendor, Signavio, where we have an out-of-the-box integration where you would maintain your processes in Signavio, and it automatically allows to get the data into LeanIX and also get applications back into Signavio. On the business capability architecture, LeanIX would be the leading solution to store business capabilities, user groups as the tool. And then if we go further down, the application architecture, integration architecture, then we're talking about the objects application, interfaces, data object. And here in this space, we have a certain overlap with ServiceNow. So in ServiceNow, you would want to have the reference to the application. So the mapping which we propose is to map the application from the LeanIX tool to the business service in ServiceNow. And so what our integration actually does, it allows us to create those applications as business services in ServiceNow automatically and update it as you define them. So not only the as-is can then be moved over, but also if you plan new applications, those are going to be created then inside of LeanIX. And then if you go further down the stack, you would talk about IT components in LeanIX. That's the software and hardware, how we call it. And the equivalent in the ServiceNow world is the product model, and then also the configuration item, which is connected to the product model. So, here we then have, again, a clear assignment to ServiceNow, so configuration items and assets. So that's where ServiceNow is actually the master. So that's today our model of how we map the different data objects to this stack. And so what we would encourage you, if you go this route, to have like a good understanding who is the owner for what data objects and who's maintaining it. But it's not like just a static view, so it's usually like a flow of things. So you need to look at how those objects are actually connected. So let's look at the left-hand side first. In LeanIX, we have this relation that we have business capabilities which are associated to applications. So you would create a business capability map out of applications, and then underneath those applications, you would have IT components like software, hardware, and they would be classified by a technology stack. Yeah? For example, you have a LAMP stack, you have middleware as a stack, you have databases. So that's what you would also all have in this technical stack. So in our use case, which we have defined as like out-of-the-box integration with ServiceNow, what we do is we allow you to push over applications to business services, and you see here some attributes. And then in the next step, what's happening is if you use the software asset management module, which is basically the discovery of ServiceNow, it allows you to discover hardware and software, and then it links it to the business services. What we do then is this discovered software and hardware is then transferred over automatically to LeanIX. So you see it here in this arrow, and then linked to the application. So that you have on both sides have this transparency in order to understand how it's all linked. And it also goes down all the way to the model category. So this is categorizing the product models. This is transferred over to the technical stack. So what we do is with that model, we allow like a full view on both sides. Yeah? So in order to reduce the friction that people have different understandings of what are applications in the world of enterprise architecture or in the world of IT service management. So some insight on how that works in the product actually. So we're now here on an application inside of LeanIX, and so I'm changing here a description. So adjusting it to here HR management, saving that. So what I'm also doing is I'm changing the business criticality of it because I feel it's more business operational. So what we can always do is we can from here jump directly to this entry in ServiceNow. So it's always linked to it. You see it because of the green bubble, and you see the description is automatically updated. So it's like a real-time update of the data from LeanIX to ServiceNow. So the next thing would be you would be able to import all the IT components automatically from ServiceNow. And what it does, it's also linking it here to ServiceNow. You see here always the linkage back to the entry in ServiceNow. You can see all the details here, what's inside this IT component. And then, last but not least, you would want to understand what's the impact of a certain IT component. So you see here this Dell server. There's an application running on this Dell server. So you can understand, do I have a risk because of the life cycle of the IT component? I can then navigate into the application and, of course, also, again, have the link to ServiceNow. Yeah, so it's a very natural way to navigate between all those systems, and it's not that you have a lot of manual steps between that. I said before that one of the things is that we've built the integration in a flexible and an extensible way. So we've come up with a blueprint of how those tools work together and how it can work, but we have put some invest into this journey in making it configurable. So what you can do in the integration is as shown here. So actually it allows you to create a mapping between the fact sheet types. So you see it here on the left-hand side, and the ServiceNow tables. So it's not hard-coded which data is transferred from kind of the one system to the other. And it's also able to say, what's the master system? So it can be ServiceNow, but it can be also LeanIX. And then further on, the mapping can be defined. So you can go on a field level and define which field should be transferred back and forth. Yeah, and so I'm really excited that Kevin later on is also here from Horizon. We have worked closely together in making this happen, and I'm very thankful that he and his team have given us so much feedback during all the process, which allowed us to come up with a solution which is not limited to one customer, but which reflects the needs of many customers, and also allows partners to adjust the integration and further build it. So this is like the first part. What we see if we think back more in the root causes for the issues in adopting enterprise architecture, we see something on the horizon, which is actually DevOps coming up. So I'm not sure how many of you today are already moving into, let's say, containerized deployments, microservices, and more or higher frequency of releases. But what we have found out is we have asked companies if they want to deploy modern ways of applications like microservices, and we've got the response that 80% of the companies we've asked, they intend to move towards microservices. So what we think is it's very important already to think about what's the impact on enterprise architecture and how do I handle that with a tool. And so one of the benefits is actually that companies who deploy microservices, they do it 5 times faster than if they don't have microservices. But that's a critical change, we think, for enterprise architecture, because today deployments are not anymore like in quarters or months. So deployments are more on a daily level, and there are companies who start to deploy like a couple of times a day. Yeah? So running behind the application owners of those applications is almost impossible if you start to deploy applications every day or every hour, because things start to change so fast. So it's not so easy to run behind those people and ask them, can you please update the application in the inventory, because what's going to happen is you will be always behind. Yeah? So there will be never a point in time where the data is accurate and the effort is really, really high. So what are we doing here? So we've come up with a solution which allows you to hook immediately into the repositories of microservices. So what it does is, in this world, you would have a source code repository for a single microservice. So it can sit on GitHub. It was in the media a lot in the last days, but it can be also in any other source code a repository. But what we do is we put in a metadata file into the source code repository. So it sits right close to the source. And what it does, it allows us to extract further build information from the microservice. So usually you have your dependencies, so what technologies you're using in this service, what libraries are you based on. So that's all already in the build information. If you have a microservice built in Java or in JavaScript, you have those build systems which you run there. And then what we do is usually you have set up a continuous integration server which builds the software. So whenever you deploy it to your test system or your production service. And what we do is we use an open source client which actually picks this metadata file, it understands it, it reads the build information, and then it pushes that information automatically into the LeanIX inventory. So whenever you do a build of your new software, then it automatically gets updated in LeanIX. And so we think that it's a very good way to early on capture this emerging microservices. Yeah? So we work together with a couple of clients in our portfolio already. They start embracing microservices, and it's a good way to early on establish this because the overhead of doing so is very minimal. And to show that, I'm actually showing a little bit of code, how it looks like. So that is a metadata file we use at LeanIX for our own service. And so what you see here, it has a name, it has a type, it has an owner, it has a description, it can have a link to where the source code is stored, you can associate tags, you can add links to like to the entry page, to the API documentation. So you have the capability of storing this critical information right there. So what you don't see is the relation to the underlying technologies. Yeah? So which libraries is it using? So that's nothing a developer really needs to maintain here because it's extracted automatically from the build system. Yeah? And so what we do is we've based this on a so-called YAML format. It's today very often used also by technologies like Kubernetes. So it's very well known by developers. And the hurdle of adding such a YAML file to a microservice repository is really limited. And what we do is we use, in our setup, we use an open source client. So the rationale behind this is many companies struggle if you put in closed source agents somewhere and put them close to source code. So that's why we decided to be very open and use a community-based solution. So it's easier for you to really understand and look into this open source client and be not afraid of having a closed source client deployed in your infrastructure. Yeah? So we got the feedback that this is a very good approach to actually go this route. Today, we're supporting Java and JavaScript projects, so which is already covering a broad range of projects, but the system is easily extendable. So we're planning on further build systems in the future. It's in a beta version today, so we're planning the general availability at some point of time in the next month. Please approach us if you're interested in learning more about this. So we're happy to share what we do. So this is actually like the second part. So an idea of how do we deal with the more DevOps type of organizations. But then for us, there's a third thing why it's hard to deal with this issue of inconsistent data and effort to collect data. And so we think that sometimes too much effort to connect the dots in enterprise architecture. And so there's one thing which enterprise architectures usually do. So it's understanding how the application landscape maps to business capabilities and to user groups. And one of the critical tasks is actually to create this mapping and say, these are this application supports a business criticality and it's used by a user group. So that's quite an effort to create those mappings. And we've did a calculation across our portfolio and looked into some numbers. And what we found out is if you draw this matrix so of business capabilities here on this axis and user group on the other axis, you come to a matrix. In average, a company has 120 business capabilities in our portfolio, and it uses 100 user groups. So if you do the math, you have 12,000 cells in that matrix. Yeah? So that's already huge. And then in average, our customers have 600 applications. So if you multiply that, you have potentially 7.2 million of allocation decisions. Yeah? So if you need to go and decide this application is supporting this business capability and this user group, you need, due to that numbers, you need to take 7.2 million decisions in this whole matrix. Yeah? So so we did some fun and relates a little bit to David's talk. So you would only take like 460 days to go through the whole matrix just to be ready the first time. So whenever a new application comes up or an application changes, you need to redo that. Yeah? So it can be pretty tedious. So one thing we've come up and thought is how can we leverage the data which is already in the inventory and improve this process. So what we're doing right now is we're using advanced analytics mechanisms, and you see it here. Once you type in a text, it automatically recommends to you the best matching business capability here. Yeah, so, and it's actually learning from the data which is in the inventory. So you see here, if I improve the text, I actually get better recommendations here. And I can right from here then go and add the business capability. I can select the field here, add it, and then it's removed from the recommendations on top. Yeah? So it's taken away, and the next matching capability is shown. And the more associations you're actually doing, the more the system learns and improves, because you have better descriptions in your applications, you have better descriptions in the business capabilities, and it also fosters that people start writing better descriptions, because their life will be easier. They don't need to search through a lot of capabilities. They just need to type the description, and they get the best categorizations. So this mechanism is available, or what we do is we're not making this only available to the linkage of business capabilities and applications. It's in general available for any relation in LeanIX. So it could be useful also for relating data objects to applications and so on. So summing it up, for those things, so what we think is very important, breaking up silos, so creating integrations with other products and allowing to cross the border into other organization and units is important. Preparing for DevOps, so it's going to change the way how enterprise architecture is actually done in the future, and we think there's a perfect role of an enterprise architect to foster this change as well. And then, of course, let the dots connect. Try to use tools and mechanisms which reduce the manual work, so you can focus more on helping your business to move into the right direction. So these are kind of three areas we as a vendor focus on, and we hope that we can jointly work on those topics to make your work actually successful. So there are a couple of customers in all different industries, and so we are excited about them. We work with them on success stories, and so we're more than happy if you take the opportunity to find out yourself, either here or in an own demo, which you can ask to get, and then try out LeanIX on your own. So just approach us or the people who are here at this day. And thank you for being here and for listening to the talk.